There's a change in priesthood. Glory to Jesus. There's a change in priesthood. There's a change in the covenant. God walked with Noah and he built a covenant with him. A covenant is an agreement between two parties. So between God and Noah, God made an agreement. He said that, I will never again destroy the earth with the waters. And he went on to make another agreement or a new covenant or a covenant with Abraham. He said, Abraham, I want you to circumcise every male around you. Everyone must be circumcised. You remember immediately that day when God spoke to Abraham, Abraham went on to circumcise Ishmael at that time because Isaac was not yet in place, and each and every male was immediately by Abraham circumcised because God built a new agreement with him. And during the dispensation of Moses, God made a new covenant. In other words, every time when God walks with you, he makes a covenant. Every time when God walked with his people in the Bible, he made a new covenant. He made a covenant. He made an agreement. God will never walk with you with an agreement. Glory to Jesus. What am I saying here? With Moses, he made a covenant. He made an agreement. He says, you know what? When he went to the Mount Sinai, he came back with a covenant. He says, God says, you must not do this. You must not do that. All those details of the covenant that God had made with the children of Israel. But here's the thing. I'm just giving you a peek of what I'll be dealing with in the next coming weeks. I want you to stay tuned. I want you to stay available because I'm going to be preaching this message, going deep into it. But I want you to get this today. There's a change in the priesthood. In that covenant that God made with Moses, there were Levites, and Levites were priests. The Bible says that as priests, obviously they offered sacrifice for themselves and for the people of God because of the sin that was God couldn't stand. God can't stand sin. So they needed to be purified with the blood of goats and all of that in the sanctuary so that God can pardon their sins. But Paul comes in and says, you know what? There's a change in a covenant. Something needs to change. God has changed things. And he says that if that covenant that Moses brought into the children of Israel, if that covenant was not faultless, there won't be a need for God to bring a new one. In other words, if that covenant, if it was still valid, if it was still good for God, God wouldn't have brought a new one through Jesus Christ. When you read the book of Hebrews chapter 7, chapter 8, even chapter 9, it tells you about this new covenant that God has made with the children of Israel. In other words, if you are a minister and you are preaching the old covenant that came through Moses, you are actually out of season. If you are in a church that still preaches the old covenant, you are in a church that is out of season. My goodness. In other words, there is a new covenant. And Paul says that if there be a need for a new covenant, there's also a need for a new priest. And that priest is a higher priest with Jesus Christ. You cannot be a priest under the covenant of Jesus Christ and preach the old covenant of Moses. The Bible says that Moses came with the law, but Jesus Christ came with grace and truth. So these two represent these covenants. One represents the covenant of the law. The other represents the covenant of grace and truth. So you cannot be under the ministry of Jesus Christ and preach the old covenant, the law which came by Moses. You need to choose. Where are you? If you are in this time and season after Jesus Christ and you're still preaching the ministry of the law, you are actually out of season. You're actually not walking with God. You don't believe me? John, in the book of 1 John chapter 1, he says that, you know what? If you're not preaching the doctrine of Christ, what is the doctrine of Christ? The doctrine of Christ is the belief system of Christ. And that belief system comes from the new covenant. There are people in this time that are still preaching the law. They will tell you about the laws of Moses. But here's the thing. God says that I'm not dealing with my people with the law, with the covenant of the law. You know why the law was necessary? Because people were lawless. People were lawless. People couldn't obey. So God had to bring the law to deal with them. In other words, if you don't do this, this is what you're going to get. But God says that I am done with that because I am bringing something that is greater than the law, the Spirit of God. In other words, when you have the Spirit of God, there is no need for you to live by the law.